In 1962, Elijah Reid only wanted to protect his family. But when a powerful white businessman was found dead, the town didn't see a hard-working young man. They saw a suspect. Soon, lies, fear, and buried secrets would turn a simple courtroom into a deadly battlefield. And one man would risk everything to uncover the truth. Before we begin the story, I'd love to know where you're sharing it from and what time it is. Feel free to leave a comment. Elijah Reid was just 22, but the weight of responsibility had aged him beyond his years. Every morning he worked quietly at Reid's laundry, folding shirts and pressing trousers while his mother, Martha, handled the customers. His father, Albert Reid, had passed 3 years earlier. He had been a soldier, a man who fought for a country that refused to fight for him in return. Elijah often wondered if his father's uniform had really meant anything in a town like Maple Creek. That morning felt like any other. Elijah kissed his mother's cheek before leaving for a delivery. "I'll be back before sunset," he promised. His mother smiled weakly. "Be careful, baby. Folks are restless these days." Elijah walked to Caldwell's general store, where he delivered freshly cleaned linens every week. Henry Caldwell, the store's owner, was waiting. A wealthy man, respected by white townsfolk and feared by black families. Henry didn't bother with small talk. "Rates have doubled," he said sharply, holding the contract. Elijah blinked. "Sir, we've always paid on time. We can't afford that." "Then find yourself another town," Henry replied coldly. Elijah felt anger rising in his chest, but he swallowed it. "That's not fair," Henry sneered. "Fair? Fair's a word for fools, son, and fools like you don't last long." Elijah gathered the paperwork and turned to leave, keeping his head high. By the time the sun set that evening, Henry Caldwell was dead, a knife buried deep in his chest, and Elijah Reid was nowhere to be found. The news spread faster than the Mississippi River in flood season. By dawn, the whole town knew Henry Caldwell was dead, and they knew who to blame. At first light, Sheriff Wayne Dobbs arrived at the Reid home. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He pushed the door open like the law gave him the right to own the place. Martha Reid stood frozen by the stove, a wooden spoon trembling in her hand. Elijah had just come back from morning deliveries. He was still wiping sweat from his brow when the sheriff's voice boomed. "Elijah Reid, you're under arrest for the murder of Henry Caldwell." Elijah's breath caught. "What? Sir, I just saw him yesterday morning. We argued, but I—" "Save it for the judge," Dobbs growled. Two deputies grabbed Elijah before he could speak another word. His mother cried out, "He was home all afternoon. He couldn't have—" But nobody listened to Martha Reid. In Maple Creek, the word of a black woman held no weight. Truth didn't matter, only fear did. As Elijah was led out in handcuffs, neighbors gathered silently along the street, some with pity in their eyes, some with quiet satisfaction, and some, perhaps the most dangerous, with no expression at all. By the time the newspaper hit the stands, the headline was already chosen. "Colored man arrested in store owner's murder." The trial was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Fast. Faster than usual. Faster than legal. But nobody protested. Not in Maple Creek. Martha Reid knew what that meant. They weren't just seeking justice. They were seeking an example. And they had found it in her son. 2 days passed. Long days. Longer nights. Martha Reid sat at her kitchen table, head in her hands. The house felt emptier than ever. Friends from the church stopped by with casseroles, but nobody stayed long. In a town like Maple Creek, defending someone like Elijah meant risking everything. That's when the knock came. 3 gentle raps. Martha opened the door to find a white man in a worn brown suit, his hat pressed against his chest. "Mrs. Reid," he said softly, "my name is Samuel Whitmore. I'm a lawyer." She stared at him, unsure whether to hope or fear. "I've heard about your son's case," Samuel continued, "and I'd like to represent him." Martha frowned. "Why? Folks like you don't usually come offering help to folks like us." Samuel smiled sadly. "Because folks like me have stayed silent too long." Martha hesitated. "Can you win?" Samuel's face hardened. "I can try, but I'll tell you right now, it won't be easy. The jury will be all white. The town has already made up its mind. And the sheriff's evidence, however thin, will be treated like gospel." He paused. But if Elijah didn't kill Henry Caldwell, I'll stand beside him, even if the whole town stands against us. Martha looked down, her hands shaking. Then she nodded. All right, God help you, Mr. Whitmore. The next morning, Samuel sat across from Elijah in the county jail. Bars separated them, but the young man's eyes were steady. I'm Samuel Whitmore, the lawyer said. Your mother's given me permission to defend you. Elijah didn't waste time. I didn't kill Mr. Caldwell. Samuel nodded. Tell me everything that happened. Elijah described the argument about the contract, the threat, his refusal to pay the higher rates, and how he'd left the store angry but not violent. After that, Samuel asked, I went straight to the lumber yard for deliveries, talked to Mr. Grady and his son, then home. Samuel scribbled notes. Good. We'll need those men to testify. Elijah leaned forward. But will they? White folks don't usually risk themselves for us. Samuel closed his notebook. Some will, some won't. But the law, real law, doesn't care about skin. It cares about truth. And if the court won't listen to truth, then I'll make them. For the first time in days, Elijah smiled. A small, tired smile, but it was a start. The courthouse of Maple Creek stood tall and proud, with white columns and a red brick face. But Elijah Reid knew what it really was, a cage where the outcome often depended more on color than on truth. The courtroom was packed. Townsfolk sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes heavy with judgment. Some had come for justice. Most had come for a spectacle. Elijah stood beside Samuel Whitmore at the defense table. His mother sat behind him, her hands folded so tightly the knuckles were white. At the prosecution's table, District Attorney Charles Gray leaned back confidently. He was a man who had built his career on winning easy cases, and this, he thought, would be the easiest of all. The judge, Harold Timmons, entered. Elderly, stern, his gray hair slicked back like polished steel. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The charges were read aloud. Murder in the first degree. The words echoed through the room like thunder. The prosecution's opening. D.A. Gray rose first. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly, this is a simple case. A wealthy businessman dead. A young colored man seen arguing with him the very morning of his death. Motive, opportunity, and evidence. He held up a knife bagged in clear plastic. This blade was found at the scene, and on it, fingerprints belonging to the defendant. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gray smiled as if the trial was already won. The people will show that Elijah Reid acted not out of self-defense or accident, but out of anger and malice. He sat down with a smug nod. The defense is opening. Samuel Whitmore stood slowly. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the room settle into a heavy, expectant silence. Ladies and gentlemen, he finally said, his voice calm but firm, the prosecution will tell you this is a simple case, but it is not. It is a case built on assumptions, fear, and a rush to judgment. He turned slightly, gesturing to Elijah. This young man did not kill Henry Caldwell. You will hear from witnesses who can confirm where he was when Mr. Caldwell was murdered. You will see that the so-called evidence is not what it appears to be. Samuel's gaze swept across the jury box. And you will be asked to decide, not based on fear, not based on the color of skin, but on truth. He sat down. Elijah exhaled softly. Martha squeezed her hands tighter. The first witness. Sheriff Dobbs was called to the stand. He described the scene, the knife, the fingerprints. Samuel stood to cross-examine. Sheriff Dobbs, he began, when you found the knife, where exactly was it? On the floor, beside the body. Beside, Samuel repeated. Not in the victim's hand? No. And did you, at any point, verify whether anyone else might have handled the knife before my client? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Didn't seem necessary. Didn't seem necessary, Samuel echoed. Thank you, Sheriff. That's all. The twist begins. As the jury scribbled notes, Samuel leaned toward Elijah. They're trying to paint you into a corner, he whispered, but they just opened a door for us. Elijah frowned. What do you mean? Samuel's eyes narrowed. If the knife wasn't in Caldwell's hand, Who put it there? By the second day of the trial, the town's curiosity had turned into frenzy. Rumors circled like vultures. Some said Elijah had confessed. Others whispered he'd been seen covered in blood. All lies. But lies, when repeated enough, begin to feel like truth. Samuel Whitmore arrived early that morning. He carried a file under his arm, one he'd stayed up all night assembling. Not just legal arguments, something bigger. Something that might tear the prosecution's story apart. The prosecution calls its star witness. D.A. Gray summoned Tommy Dale, a young white store clerk from Caldwell's General Store. Tommy adjusted his tie nervously as he took the stand. "Did you see the defendant at the store the day of the murder?" Gray asked. "Yes, sir," they argued, real heated. "And after the argument," Tommy hesitated, "Mr. Caldwell told me to lock up early. Said he had to settle the matter." "Did he mention how?" "No, sir." Gray nodded. "Thank you." Cross-examination and a cracked story. Samuel approached the witness box. "Mr. Dale, you said you locked up early that day?" "Yes, sir." "What time?" "About 2 p.m. Samuel flipped through his notes. But police records show the store was seen open at 3:30. Witnesses reported entering and purchasing items. Tommy froze. I must have been mistaken." "Or," Samuel leaned in, "someone reopened the store after you left." The crowd stirred. "And tell me, Mr. Dale, where were you between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m.? I was home." "Alone?" "Yes." Samuel paused. "No one can confirm that?" "No, sir." The unexpected witness. Samuel turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Grady Thompson." Grady, owner of the lumberyard, shuffled nervously to the stand. "Mr. Thompson, did you see Elijah Reid on the afternoon of Mr. Caldwell's death?" "Yes, around 3 p.m. He delivered supplies. We spoke for about 30 minutes. "And during that time, would it have been possible for Elijah to commit the crime and return unnoticed?" Grady shook his head. "No, sir. He was with me the whole time." A ripple went through the room. DeGray's face darkened. The jury senses doubt. Samuel let the moment hang in the air. "Members of the jury," he said quietly, "you now have testimony placing my client miles from the crime scene, at the exact time of death." He turned toward Elijah. "This is not the story the prosecution promised you. This is the truth." A plot twist begins to form. But as the judge called for recess, Samuel noticed something. Tommy Dale had slipped out of the courtroom. Quietly, too quietly. Samuel's instincts flared. The story wasn't unraveling. It was hiding something deeper. That night, Samuel didn't sleep. While the town rested, believing the trial was nearly decided, he sat by his small desk, turning over every detail in his mind. The argument, the knife, Tommy Dale's inconsistent timeline. And then it struck him, the fingerprints. They had been the prosecution's strongest evidence. But something had always nagged at him. Sheriff Dobbs had found the knife beside the body, not in Caldwell's hand, and the knife wasn't Elijah's. In fact, Elijah's family didn't even own knives like that. So why were Elijah's prints on it? The breakthrough. The next morning, Samuel paid a visit to the courthouse clerk's office. "Morning, Martha," he greeted the aging clerk. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore. What brings you here?" "I need to see the evidence logs for the Caldwell case." Martha hesitated. "You'll need a court order." Samuel leaned in. "And if the court is in recess, but this concerns potential evidence tampering?" She sighed. "I'll risk it." She handed over the logbook. Samuel flipped through the entries until he found it. The knife had been logged twice. Once by Deputy Harris at 6:10 p.m., and again, 2 hours later, by Sheriff Dobbs himself. 2 separate entries, 2 different fingerprints reports. In the first, no usable prints found. In the second, Elijah Reid's prints confirmed. Samuel's pulse quickened. Someone had tampered with the evidence after it was first processed, but who? A risky confrontation. Samuel didn't wait. He marched straight to Sheriff Dobbs' office. The sheriff looked up from his desk. "Come to surrender your client?" "No," Samuel said coldly. "I've come to ask why the knife's fingerprints changed between the first and second logging." Dobbs stiffened. You accusing me of something, lawyer? Samuel didn't flinch. Not yet, but I'm prepared to, unless you tell me how Elijah's prints got onto that knife hours after it was first recovered. The sheriff's jaw tightened. You're walking a dangerous line. So are you. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Dobbs muttered, Ask Tommy Dale. He was in charge of evidence that night. Samuel nodded, already turning toward the door. The plot thickens. Tommy Dale wasn't at home. He wasn't at the store. But a hotel clerk at the edge of town remembered him checking in late the night before, with a suitcase, running. Samuel felt both fear and grim satisfaction. Someone's afraid of what the truth might expose. The courtroom awaits. By the time court resumed the next day, Samuel was ready, more than ready. And as the jurors filed in, the weight of the case had shifted. Elijah felt it. Martha felt it. Even the DA sensed it. Because now, the defense wasn't just fighting to prove Elijah's innocence. They were about to expose a conspiracy. The courtroom was silent as the bailiff called, Court is now in session. Samuel Whitmore rose from his seat, his face calm but his mind razor-sharp. Your Honor, he began, before the prosecution calls its next witness, the defense would like to recall Mr. Tommy Dale to the stand. Dia Gray frowned. Objection. Mr. Dale has already testified. Judge Timmons peered over his glasses. Mr. Whitmore? Samuel held up the evidence logbook. New information has come to light that directly contradicts Mr. Dale's prior testimony. The judge nodded. Proceed. The witness returns. Tommy Dale shuffled into the room, looking paler than before. His tie was missing, and his shirt was wrinkled. Samuel wasted no time. Mr. Dale, you testified that after the argument between Elijah Reid and Henry Caldwell, you locked up the store and went home, correct? Yes. Samuel opened the logbook. But the store remained open. Multiple witnesses made purchases after you claimed to have closed. Tommy licked his lips. I guess I got the time wrong. Samuel's voice hardened. And you also handled evidence collected from the crime scene, didn't you? Tommy froze. Yes. Samuel flipped the logbook toward the jury. This log shows that when Deputy Harris first collected the knife, no usable fingerprints were found. But hours later, when the evidence was logged again, after you'd handled it, Elijah Reid's prints mysteriously appeared. The room rippled with gas. Samuel leaned in. Did you plant my client's fingerprints on that knife? Tommy's face drained of color. No, I just logged the evidence like I was told. By whom? Tommy swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the prosecution's table, to D.A. Gray. But Gray avoided his gaze. Who told you to alter the evidence? Samuel pressed. I can't answer the question. Tommy broke. It was Sheriff Dobbs. He said if we didn't pin it on Elijah, the whole town would erupt. Caldwell was too important. We couldn't have people thinking anyone else did it. The courtroom erupted. Shouts, gasps. Even Judge Timmons slammed his gavel repeatedly. Bang, bang, bang. Order! Order in the court! A town's ugly secret exposed. Samuel turned slowly toward the jury. There you have it. This case was not built on evidence. It was built on fear. Fear of disrupting the town's delicate balance. Fear of challenging prejudice. His voice dropped low. But the law is not fear. The law is truth. He sat down. Elijah closed his eyes. His mother covered her mouth in disbelief. The DA's silence. Dia Gray remained frozen. He didn't object. He didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. The next morning, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters, protesters, curious townsfolk. Some held signs supporting Elijah. Others clung to old prejudices. Inside, the jury took their seats. 12 faces, each carrying the weight of justice, fear, and the town's long history of division. Judge Timmons addressed them. You've heard the evidence. You've heard the lies exposed. It is now your duty to deliver a verdict. The jury disappeared into deliberation. Hours passed. The waiting was brutal. Elijah sat motionless beside Samuel. His mother clutched a worn Bible. DeGray stared into the distance, a man who'd gambled everything and lost. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the jury returned. 12 solemn faces. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Elijah Reid. The whole room held its breath. Not guilty. A pause, then an eruption. Elijah's mother sobbed in relief. Samuel closed his eyes, exhaustion flooding him. But as the cheers swelled, Samuel noticed something. Sheriff Dobbs wasn't in the room. Neither was Tommy Dale, and D.A. Gray had slipped out during the verdict. Something wasn't right. A new danger. Samuel motioned for Elijah and his mother to stay seated. Stay here. Don't leave. He pushed through the crowd toward the hallway. As he rounded a corner, he stopped cold. Sheriff Dobbs and Tommy Dale were there, but they weren't alone. Gray stood with them, holding a suitcase. Samuel caught just enough of the conversation. We bury this for good. Dale and I leave town. Dobbs, you keep things quiet. Nobody needs to know what else Caldwell was hiding. Samuel's blood ran cold. What else Caldwell was hiding? The final twist revealed. Samuel stepped into view. Going somewhere, gentlemen? All three men stiffened. Dobbs reached for his belt. You don't want to do this, Whitmore. I think I do, Samuel said. From behind, two federal marshals appeared. Samuel had called them early that morning. I suspected there was more to this case, he said. I suspected Caldwell's death wasn't just about a petty argument. He looked at Gray. And now you just confirmed it. The marshals stepped forward. You're all under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. As they were led away, Gray hissed. You think this will change this town, Whitmore? You think these people really want justice? Samuel didn't answer, because he knew the truth. Justice wasn't about what people wanted. It was about what was right. A new beginning. Back in the courtroom, Elijah embraced his mother. Samuel returned to their side. It's over, he said softly. You're free. No, sir, Elijah replied. Now the real work begins. Not just for me, for this whole town. Samuel smiled. For the first time in years, he believed change might be possible. Months passed. The summer heat gave way to the crisp winds of autumn. Elijah Reid returned to his small home on the edge of Millstone. He took a job at the local sawmill, determined to build an honest life, though the shadows of the trial lingered in every corner of town. Some folks still crossed the street when they saw him. Some refused to speak his name, but others nodded respectfully. A few even offered work or words of quiet encouragement. Change was slow, but it had begun. Samuel's choice. Samuel Whitmore declined offers to run for public office. He had no interest in politics. He wanted something simpler, to keep defending the voiceless, to remind Millstone and himself that even in the darkest places, truth could prevail. The federal marshal's investigation widened. Sheriff Dobbs and Tommy Dale were sentenced for their roles in the conspiracy. D.A. Gray struck a plea deal, agreeing to testify against others involved in Millstone's long-standing corruption. The old guard of Millstone's justice system collapsed. A new one was slowly, painfully being built. The unspoken legacy. Years later, people still told the story of Elijah Reid's trial, but not as a tale of a murder accusation. They told it as the day a boy stood against fear, the day a lawyer exposed the lies that kept an entire town chained, the day Millstone remembered what justice should mean. And though Elijah rarely spoke of those dark weeks in court, every time he walked past the old courthouse, he paused, not out of bitterness, not even out of triumph, but as a quiet reminder that no verdict, no matter how just, could change the past, but it could shape the future. Final words, injustice thrives where silence reigns, but truth once spoken can shake even the oldest foundations.